And welcome back to Deck Breakdown. My name's Alzorath. This is the first breakdown of this month. Since the request was Serena Thought Ripper for this month, we are going to be testing several decks that are online, that are popular or well-known. Some of them may not be as well-known. The first one we're going to be looking at is Fou DeLile. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. He made a Bounty Hunter deck back in, I believe it was July, that was fairly successful. It's a really strong deck, especially in an ally-heavy meta. It relies on Serena Thought Ripper and her ability to pump her weapons and cause discards and basically punish the opponent going in and out of the graveyard. It has decent field control, and it's got really strong presence with its weapons and Serena's ability. Now, the deck is not as strong in the current meta as it was back whenever it was created. This is going to be obvious. Every deck shows its age after a while because people develop countermeasures to it. One of the cornerstones of this deck, in my opinion, though, is the use of Lily Rose Gold, an often overlooked ally with off-kilter boobs. I'm sorry, that still bothers me. They're pointing a different direction than the rest of her torso. But yeah, often her sister, the Jasmine Rose Colt, gets a lot more attention. And I can see a place for Jasmine in this deck as well, but Lily Rose Colt is able to pull items from the graveyard whenever she's summoned. It's definitely worth the extra casting cost, and she is very strong in item-reliant hero decks. You don't see her played very often, though, because she's not part of the traditional, basically, human ally mixture, if you will. She's more of an afterthought, kind of like Erica Shadowhunter often is. Of course, Lily Rose Colt has a lot more applicable uses and kind of falls in the category of Sandra Trueblade, in that useful for certain decks, but won't see play in a lot of other decks. In my modifications, I actually often boost Lily up to 4 cards in the deck, so I can be sure to get that late game presence from her. And this deck also poses an interesting little point of the resource curve for allies and abilities. It's got a nice curve going on there. It's got a lot of low and medium things to build up so you can get to your weapon later in the game without too much hassle. And it would prove very, very useful in an ally-heavy meta. You have your turn 2 drops also, in addition to the Lily Rose Gold to bring your weapon back later. You have the turn 2 drops to get you that early board presence with 2 Pewins, which are fairly standard turn 2 drops for a human deck. You're going to see Pewins 9 times out of 10 being played on turn 2 as a human deck. You'll see Nightshades being your main presence here. And against ally decks, Nightshades are amazing. They are evil little things. The only ones that are really able to deal with them are mages and Zaladar, and basically anything that does direct damage. Some shadow decks are in general actually better able to deal with Nightshades due to their ally abilities, but human decks, which are the primary decks that are being played right now, not so much, because you don't have as much direct damage from human creatures and human abilities until you get into what is currently the popular meta, which is mages and Zaladar. Zaladar being the lone pinnacle of the shadow allies. The general consensus right now is that shadow is slightly weaker than human to play. There are exceptions to this, and they're not popularly well-known exceptions, so we'll see how those work out. I would like to cover some shadow heroes later on, because shadow is not my strongest, and that's part of the reason why I'm doing these deck breakdowns, because it forces me to spend a month focusing on that particular hero and breaking apart their strategies and then building my deck. The goal is to have these first 3 episodes be basically breakdowns of popular or strong decks for that hero, and then I'll be doing modifications, and you'll see that through my gameplays to that particular deck. And then at the end, I'll be looking at the 3 modified versions of those decks and end up building my own deck derived from what I've learned from that. So that's the general plan. Anyway, back onto this particular deck. Alden didn't really find much of a use for me in the current meta. He's a good card, and he's very powerful as far as human allies go. You do have at least 2 of the 3 cards that I prefer to call the human trifecta, in my opinion, which is the human trifecta, in my opinion, is Alden, Aeon, and Earthen Protector, which is a nasty combo no matter who's playing it. But in this deck, it doesn't really fit, and I don't think Alden really fits that well. I would replace him either with Jasmine or I'm forgetting what other card. I would replace him with Jasmine or Tainted Oracle. Now, Tainted Oracle will boost your draw engine, but it also takes an extra turn to bring him out. So you are looking at a sacrifice there that would push the curve of this really high, and it may not be something you want. Priest of the Light is your control card as far as allies go. Of course, as most people know, he drops 1 shadow energy off the opponent and you gain 1 life. This helps you out because it heals you, and it hinders your opponent being able to use their shadow ability, which is key in a lot of these games, especially against, like, say, Zaladar. Now, Zaladar does have a counter to this with Shadow Font, and usually I've found he's able to overcome the use of Priest of the Light unless you're able to burst a bunch of Priest of the Light in successive order. Now, Priest of the Light is a 3/3. That's not exactly the strongest turn 3 drop you have. Most turn 3 drops are gonna have 4 life. His ability is the cornerstone of him, and personally I find it more effective to save up 2 or 3 Priest of the Light in your hand and then cast them turn after turn after turn. Or if you get them early, cast them turn after turn. Turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. Well, turn 3, turn 5, turn 6, but still. If you don't get an Alden, or, I mean, not an Alden, Aeon or something in there. Let's go ahead and get that thing to reseed. There we go. Next up on the list of allies is the Aeon. Again, this falls into the same category as Alden for me. I agree with one of the posts later on in the thread for Fou DeLile's Bounty Hunter deck, which I will try and link below, by the way. I'll try to link the original decks and all of these below in these breakdowns. Aeon kind of falls into the same category as Alden. He didn't really fit in my opinion, with this deck while I was playing through with it. He felt kind of like an extra. He's a very strong card. His presence is definitely not ignored whenever he comes into the field. Enemies will try to kill him unless they can kill you faster. And for him, he's too expensive for the use for this deck. I agree with the use of Armored Sandworm, which we'll pull up real quick right now. Armored Sandworm is the human staying power. You don't want it against priests, but it is great against mages. It's great against anything that's direct damage that doesn't ignore your abilities. Banebow ignores his ability, which is one reason why a sneak Banebow can kind of play like a Zaladar against your Armored Sandworms. But yeah, in the test decks, I do switch out Armored Sandworm for Aeon at times. I don't think I've recorded one with that change, but it's definitely one to look at. I've also switched out, I brought in Jasmines and tested out a few different ally combinations, and I think there are better ally combinations for this particular hero in the current meta. Against an ally deck, this would have been much stronger. As standalone, not as good nowadays. It's showing its age. It's been countered, simply put. I do see this possibly being useful a couple more cycles down the road, possibly even after the expansions come out. Although I see expansion cards coming into this would probably be better than certain options here. It would provide more options as well. Assassination, cornerstone of most rogue decks. It's I wouldn't say the ultimate ally control, but it is definitely up there. It's right up there with Captured Prey, in my opinion. Captured Prey being slightly better in that it can deal with things such as Tainted Oracle without having to give your opponent draws. This, however, gives them draws if you kill Tainted Oracle, which would be a waste, in my opinion. seeing as it's only a 2/2. P1 can kill that in one shot. Assassination's better used on sandworms, on Aeons, on pretty much any big guy. It's good on Jasmines too. Whenever the opponent gets a turn 3 drop Jasmine, pop Assassination, you have basically free run with your turn 1 and turn 2 drops. Stop Thief and Ill-Gotten Gains, those are pretty self-explanatory. Stop Thief is easily the best item control card in the game. It doesn't destroy support abilities, but my god, it destroys everything else. And it is best targeted at basically draw engines, unless you're against something, say, like Amber Rain, where you want to use it to get rid of the weapons so you don't take as much damage. Let's see, Ill-Gotten Gains is your draw. Nightshade, as I said, was great in anti-ally. It's great against anything that doesn't do direct damage. Definitely a must include in as far as allies go on that turn 2 drop for most rogue decks and any ally-based rogue deck. You want to have probably at least 2 Nightshades, if not go all the way up to 4. I do not end up taking these out in any of my test runs. I might after I record this. I don't know yet. I'm not going to show off my modified decks, honestly, because while they'll contribute to the final, they won't be final decks in and of themselves, I don't think. Not in my opinion. Black Garb is part of a combo in this deck. Black Garb is your alternate assassination, which is why I think this deck can actually get away with 3 assassinations. It could possibly even do away with one of those assassinations to add in something like a Spell Eater Band or something like that. We'll get into the specifics on what armors I'll switch out a little bit later. Black Garb, its combo is basically against things like Sandworm, where you can't hurt them without using your ability. Pop them with Ankle Breaker while wearing Black Garb, Sandworm's dead. Anything that can attack is dead. Only thing it doesn't work against is something like, say, Death Mage Thaddeus, which has 0 attack. Or we have Katrina down here as a good example. Or, I mean, Katrin, which is a 0 attack creature as well. Black Garb is an amazing card for cheap, and it deters a lot of people from attacking if they're ally based. If they're weapon based, you're screwed. Just plain and simple. And if we move on over here, we of course have 4 Ankle Breakers. That's given in any Serena deck. You're going to have 4 Ankle Breakers, plain and simple. Another common one to see 4 of is, let's see if I can jump over to it real quick. There it is, Throwing Knife. The Ambush ability, really nice. I don't particularly like Throwing Knife, simply because of the Ambush ability, and it doesn't mesh well with your Black Garb. If you're not running Black Garb, Throwing Knife is definitely one of your best bets for an alternate weapon. In this particular deck, I don't particularly like it. You might see it pop up in one of the future Serena decks that I test. I haven't decided which one's particular. I'm going to go with a solo Serena, and I'm going to go with a more of a hybrid Serena, or possibly even an ally Serena. This is closer to a hybrid, in my opinion. And the alternate weapon that Fou DeLile chose was Dagger of Unmaking. Now, there are reasons to like this and reasons not to like this. This does not play well with Ill-Gotten Gains, in my opinion, because it's sending it back to their hand, and they'll just bring it out either on the next turn or they'll use it as a resource. I don't like that. I very much prefer the use of Golden Catar as my alternate weapon. It has less durability, but seeing as how you aren't double tapping the opponent because you only have a single attack, you're not a Wolfian, you're not a hunter. You're not going to be having rapid fire or speed strike. You're going to be doing 1 durability at a time. This gives you have 2 attacks with Golden Catar. Chances are the opponent will either break off Dagger of Unmaking before they'll break it with an ability, or they'll break it with chump hits with their hero and with allies they can cast cheaply, or allies that don't take any damage from Dagger of Unmaking, such as Sandworm, Gargoyle, anything with Reinforced armor? Anyone use that card? No? Oh, I'm gonna have to make a deck around it. But yeah, Golden Catar I prefer over Dagger of Unmaking. I play with it a lot. I use it in a lot of rogue test decks, and I actually even use it in some hunter decks to decent effect. I wouldn't say it's underestimated. A lot of people do use it, but it's not really in the mainstream. It's more of one of those, oh, it might be in there kind of cards. It makes its way into some of my modifications. I've been switching them around. I've of course been throwing in Spell Eater bands because the current meta for rogues and hunters, you need it. And yes, they will have the Leyline Nexuses to destroy your Spell Eater bands. But ideally, you'll have no turn 1 drop. You'll drop a Pew in turn 2. Turn 3, Priest of Light or a Jasmine. Turn 4, I actually end up running Tainted Oracles, which is usually my turn 4 drop. That or Ill-Gotten Gains if I've already gotten one. Turn 5, you drop out your Ankle Breaker. Turn 6, you drop out your Spell Eater bands. That's kind of ideal. Turn 3, you have other options as well. Turn 3, you could drop out your Black Garb instead of a, say, Priest of the Light or a Jasmine. That's another good combo, but you're not going to run your ideal most of the time. The reason I don't like Old Iron Dagger as an alternate, it's cheap, and it would be a good turn 3 drop. It just kind of conflicts with Black Garb again on that being turn 3 drop. And I don't want to drop it on turn 4, and by turn 5 I should have my Ankle Breaker. If I don't, I'm a little bit in trouble. If it was 2 casting costs, it would be perfect. Like Rusty Iron Sword is for warriors, but it doesn't play well for me. I so much prefer Golden Catar on turn 5 if I don't have that Ankle Breaker. There are alternate armors for Serenas. You'll see, chances are, by the time I get done testing this, you'll see at least one deck with a Gravedigger's Cloak in it show up on this month's deck breakdowns. It's a great card. It's very useful for Serena, especially with her ability. Another alternate option, I actually prefer this more for hunters than for rogues, is Night Prowler. It basically steals your opponent's hand. When combined with Serena Thoughtripper's ability, it's kind of fun because you're not taking just one card, you're taking 2 cards. You use her ability to make them discard one, and you grab the other one. And then they usually break your armor. For turn 5 armor, it's not very useful on the defense, but it is great to drop and surprise them with that nice little hit on your turn. Crimson Vest, I actually can see it coming into play for this deck because one of the key parts that Fou DeLile points out in his thread is that you are focusing on killing your opponent's allies. This was built in an ally heavy meta. Of course you're going to be doing that. Crimson Vest would be really good for that if you can guarantee it. Unfortunately, you can only have one armor out, so it's a choice between the big Crimson Vest to heal yourself or the cheap Black Garb. And honestly, I see why Black Garb wins out. This armor will stick around for 2 or 3 turns. Black Garb will stick around for two hits, pretty much. But if it's an ally that's hitting you, that ally is gone. If an ally is hitting you with Crimson Vest, not so much. Leyline Nexus and Sever Ties, honestly, don't make it into my modifications on this deck. I haven't tried them. I'll try and work some in to see if I can get them to be useful for that, but it doesn't really work well with this style. I mean, you have Stop Thieves to handle anything that Leyline Nexus would really want to target, and Sever Ties, the only things you're going to really want to get rid of are Speed Strike and Rapid Fire, and possibly the Warrior Draw Engine or their Enrage, which boosts their life. I don't see it working its way in there. There's a lot of options you can look at for this deck. One of the modifications I actually really enjoyed, and it did cut back on my ally usage, was the use of Sorcerous Poison. This, I used it several times to fairly decent success, especially whenever you, it's kind of like one of those, ooh, this is going to hurt moments whenever you see that 4 damage sorceress poison, you're going to discard a card, ankle breaker coming at your face. It's gonna end up really hurting bad, and I actually really enjoyed using this card for dealing with an alternate version of this deck. Retreat, you're better off with Assassination right now. You're not going to really have enough room for adding retreats. As far as allies go, oddly enough, in this deck, I would not use the big 3. I would definitely stick to standalone allies. If you want a little bit more control, you can look at Raven Wildheart. She is going to conflict on your turn 5 drop, but she is good for board control and gives you a little bit more time to use your Angle Breaker against the healer. I mean, not the healer, the hero. And I do enjoy having her, but she is expensive, so you have to really be careful about that. Armored Sandworm tends to stack up a little bit better, as I explained earlier. Tainted Oracle is a nice inclusion for getting that draw engine going, especially if you don't get that ill-gotten gains out. I like running 3 of them. This deck does okay with none, but I like having that extra little oomph to get that card out, and I enjoy his Crab Claw. Let's see what else. Zoe, she would be useful, and she is a turn 3 drop. I haven't tested her, but in all my experiences with Zoe Silversmith, her ability doesn't really work out that much, because you're going to have to be using those resources to cast other things. You just don't have that much to sacrifice in a 40 card deck. Now, there are exceptions to this, like whenever you get card screwed. She'd definitely be useful whenever you run into situations where you are just not getting your draw engine, but you get her out and you get your Ankle Breaker out. It'll let you keep it around for a little while longer. If she could boost armor, that would make her so much more useful, but it would also probably increase her casting cost, which would make her in turn less useful. She is a 2/4, so she can survive most turn 2 drop hits. She can't survive very many turn 3 drop hits, but not many things can yet. Marshland Sentinel I wouldn't bother with. I mean, it is a good control, but again, it falls into the same category as Raven, except this will also be eating up your shadow energy, which you need to be boosting your weapon with to make those hits count. There is some discussion of combos with Christopher Wilde, such as Chris and Assassination or Chris and Retreat. Christopher Wilde is... I'm going to save that discussion for another deck breakdown probably, because it is a strategy in and of itself, and you actually see me use it as a... I think it was my Lance deck. It was either Lance or Boris against an opponent, and I use it to wipe the board. It was Boris. I definitely remember that one. Now, it was a couple videos ago. You'll probably be able to look it up. It was fairly recent. Just look for my basic Boris deck. It was one of them that I lost too, so. But he's very useful in some board wipes. And I think that might be about it for like surface scratching with this deck. I do like Jasmine as a turn 3 drop in this deck. I marginally prefer her over Zoe. Zoe's ability, they both cost 2 resources to use their ability, but Jasmine will shut down the opponent, whereas Zoe will just give you another turn to use your Ankle Breaker. It's kind of hit or miss. Personal preference, Jasmine. I can definitely see Zoe working its way in, though she is a little bit don't bother with Dirk. I do up to 4 lilies in many of my test modifications because she is so quintessential to this deck. It is crazy. I'm actually tempted to start using her in some of my test hunter decks, so to get those bows back. And you have so many useful items in this deck, even just raw, not to mention modified. And yeah, I think that's going to be about throwing knife. Throwing knife, I almost forgot to mention this in a little more detail. Throwing knife will see its way into some of these deck breakdown decks, I do believe. If not, I will do a special mention of it later. Because this is another one of those strange, like Golden Qatar is, it's another one of those strange, it's good, but you don't hear people talking about it very often. But it's good for specific reasons. The ambush effect. If you're dealing 3 damage in ambush, that is not bad. Of course, Dark Claw's going to outdamage you, but he is the quintessential lone wolf. He is the solo hero embodied kind of thing. Whereas rogues aren't quite as solo. I'll probably end up with a near solo, though, from the way things are looking. That's just for now, though. Throwing knife can be very painful, and it is a turn 4 drop instead of a turn 5 drop. You don't really have much in the way of support abilities that are going to help this just yet. I'm hesitant to mention something with Assassin's Cloak that would make it useful for this. If you rummage around on the forums enough, you'll find out what I'm kind of hinting at, but I'm not going to put it into a deck breakdown because it is not a real strategy. It is an exploit. An exploit, if you will, instead of wrong emphasis on the right syllable. Even I did that wrong. Wow. Anyway, there are uses for Assassin's Cloak in the current game. They will be removed. It is something that is being fixed. But it can also I see Assassin's Cloak as more of a lance card, just saying that right there, if you're using it for its intended purpose. Lay low, I don't like in this deck. There is a use for it. I'm going to cover that probably in the solo Serena category. And I think some of you will probably know what that is. Hint, hint. It's on this page. But yeah, I think that's going to be about it for covering of Fou DeLile's Bounty Hunter deck and my thoughts and discussion on modifications and uses of it. And it is a very good deck. It is definitely one you should look at if you are looking at a matchup where you're going to be running into a lot of opponents using allies. And it is definitely one that you can consider modifying to be very effective even in the current meta. Though I do see some big holes that need to be filled before you can really use it for current high-ranked quick matches. In tournaments, this one would do okay. I don't see it getting very far in a tournament without using a little more control and refining its allies quite a bit. Advantages, good resource curve. Disadvantages, not really applicable to current meta. But yeah, this has been Deck Breakdown, the first one for Serena Thought Ripper. 1 of 4. And hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys look at Fou DeLile's Serena deck as well as some of his other decks. He makes some very creative and very innovative builds, which is one of the reasons why I looked at his deck first. And he is a decent player as well. He's one of the ones that you definitely have to look out for if you're going to be playing against him. You should always remember that he is a good player. And he makes good decks that are going to come out from left field too, usually. It's kind of scary. But yeah, I will see you guys next time on Deck Breakdown. This has been Alzorath. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment below, and peace out. Keep playing Shadow Era and other games, and hopefully I'll get over this recording issue soon so we can get more videos up regularly. And yeah, peace.